Hello, everyone. Sorry, Phil Turek here. And in this episode, the title is Destroy the City. Now, where did that come from? It really is a reference to a speech given by a politician in 1896. And he was trying to make a point about the relationship between cities and the farming land surrounding the cities. Okay, so I'm going to try to make a connection between technology and freedom as part of this episode. All right, so let's see how well I pull that off. In the future, there will be a vibrant, self sustaining human civilization on Mars. The high road to Mars is one built on a foundation of gracious professionalism, the bedrock ethos of the first robotics competition. The earthbound dreamers of today, who are working to open the high road to a future Martian civilization, are the ancestors of tomorrow's Martians. I'm Phil Turek, one such ancestral Martian. Look at what I'm trying to do by creating simulated Martian cultural ambassadors to act as positive social influencers to somewhat depolarize society here in the United States. Imagine how much even better it would be if the United States were to bring real Martian ambassadors here. Okay, so the very first thing is here's my standard format that I've been using for this. And I asked my wife to take a look at all this, and she's pointed out I need to make some changes. So here is the new format I'll be using going forward, I hope. Credit to some students that I had been working with this past spring. I believe this is from Paris. That's the name of the student, not the location. And she liked this background and font, so I'm adapting it and trying to use this going forward. Destroy the city, but also trying to change a little bit. So instead of putting all the text up on the screen, I'm going to have to read it to you while I put up some images that try to go along with it. So this was an 1896 speech by William Jennings Bryan, and he wanted to run for president of the United States. And the issue was, should the U.S. have the gold standard or the silver standard? And anyways, he gave the speech, and this little part of his broader speech is the one that I wanted to work with. And what he had said was, the great cities rest upon our broad and fertile prairies. Burn down your cities and leave our farms, and your cities will spring up again as if by magic. But destroy our farms, and the grass will grow in the streets of every city in the country. Okay, so he's making the point that you need the surrounding infrastructure to support the growth of a city. You take it away, the city dies. And that's true in the United States. We have ghost towns, mostly from mining experiences. I see I made a tactical error. All right. So I'm going to try to make an analogy between the farmland and the cities to the idea of, well, here we go. So there's a modern conservative, you would call him, who's been writing opinion pieces that I resonate with. So I want to share with you some of his thoughts and ideas. His name is David Brooks. You can Google him. He often writes in a magazine called The Atlantic, sometimes puts opinion pieces that get spread around the internet a bit. But drawing from a couple of his different articles recently, he's talked about the rise of civilization. And I just like the way that he phrased it. So he said, in the beginning, there was agony. Under the empires of old, the strong did what they willed, and the weak suffered what they must. And so for that, I drew up a few images here. There's Julius Caesar, Genghis Khan, and Tyrannus, or whoever this guy is on the right. And that's the way most of human civilization has been. These guys are the rulers. And you poor souls, the rest of us poor souls, just have to We don't have rights. All we have are privileges if they choose to share it with us. So, yikes, this is what most of human history has been like. But um, David Brooks goes on and says, but over the centuries, people built the sinews of civilization, constitutions to restrain power, international alliances to promote peace, legal systems to peacefully settle disputes, scientific institutions to cure disease, news outlets to advance public understanding, charitable organizations to ease suffering, businesses to build wealth and spread prosperity, and universities to preserve, transmit, and advance the glories of our way of life. These institutions make our lives sweet, loving, and creative, rather than nasty, brutish, and short. Okay? And he summarized it and said civilization is about learning, compassion, scientific wonder, the pursuit of justice. Okay? And I totally agree with that. Now, there's the tyrants of old and civilization of modern times. So that brings up a question. Is your neighbor your enemy or your friend? So here we have two opposing viewpoints on that. On the left is an image of Thomas Malthus, who in 1800 put forward his thesis that the earth is very finite and we have limited resources. And as the human population expands, there's going to come a time when there aren't enough resources for the expanding population. And so there are natural mechanisms at work, diseases and wars, famines, to keep the population in check and not exceed the carrying capacity of our planet. But this has long been the justification for tyrants to try to destroy civilization. Their motivation has always been there's not enough to go around, and therefore I'm going to take what you have and keep it for myself, and the rest of you can suffer. Okay, so that is Malthusian population theory. And had he looked backwards through time, he would have seen it wasn't right in the first place. On the right, you might recognize this. This is a photograph of Dr. Robert Zubrin, who for the past 35 years has been a very active space advocate for expanding humanity into space, particularly onto Mars. He is always bubbling forth with new ideas. There's lots of podcasts about him. I've been to a number of his events and talks. I was at his very first public presentation of his Mars Direct plan way back in Memorial Day weekend 1990 and going forward from there. So, quoting from him, or at least maybe paraphrasing from him, he's pointed out that there's no such thing as a natural resource. Okay, now that's quite different from Malthus, who said, there's only so much land, there's only so much, all these other things. But Zubrin points out land wasn't a resource until farming was invented. And copper wasn't a resource until low temperature kilns were invented. Iron wasn't a resource until high temperature kilns were invented. And once iron was invented, then you could have plows, and farming expanded tremendously. When long distance sailing ships were invented in 1500, then the world began global trade. And what was invented in one part of the world would become useful everywhere throughout the world. And so Zubrin, puts forward this thesis that there are only natural raw materials, that the amount of copper that was present in 1800 is still the same total amount of copper present today. But we've learned how to make different use of that copper. Now we use it to transmit electricity from one place to another. And so that's a totally different application for copper that is harnessing, as Zubrin put it in one of his um, talks, quoting someone else, harnessing the forces of nature instead of harnessing other humans. Zubin gave a talk once about explaining why the North won the Civil War against the South in the United States. And one reason is because in the South, they were using human slaves uh, to enhance the wealth of the landowners, whereas in the North, they were harnessing the forces of nature, water wheels, and eventually electricity. Okay. So that's why we are so well off today compared to 1800 when Malthus was claiming that things are just going to get worse as there's become more people. Zubrin's thesis is that here he is, the more people there are and the better they live, better educated, more resources at the disposal of each individual, then the more inventors we have, and the more inventions we have, the more rapidly we can expand plenty for everyone. Because again, once an invention is made anywhere on this planet, it becomes useful everywhere on this planet. And so your neighbor is not your enemy, the way Malthus would have it. Your neighbor is your friend. But you have to nurture that friend. So if they're an immigrant and they're coming here, you still have to, get them into a better life, better educated, more resources at their disposal. And so look at the different philosophy these two people would have with respect to immigration, right? So the tyrants on the left would say immigrants are poisoning our blood and stealing our resources and our jobs, whereas Zubrin on the right would say you give those people a safe home, a safe place, liberty, justice for all. They will contribute. They will add to the creative solving of world's problems and enhancing our quality of life. You can't deny that our quality of life today is better than it was in 1800, even though our population is much greater than it was in 1800. So Malthus was completely wrong. Tyrants are completely wrong about what attitude they should have towards immigrants, for example. All right, but let me go on. So I'm using the same image again because I want it to be the analog or analogy. So cities require land to survive and thrive. So too, my claim is inventors require freedom and civilization to thrive. Right now, there's a war going on where Russia is attacking and invading Ukraine. Russia has a political army, so run by a tyrant who views life as being cheap and disposable as long as it's not his own, right? Putin. So there are a lot of casualties. Casualty rate for the Russian army is something like 1,400 casualties per day as they make little tiny advances in the territory in the nation of Ukraine. Ukraine is a government that is had been corrupt, but they were trying to reform and become much more aligned with democratic values. And so they have a much more professional army. And that's why they had innovations going for them, inventiveness. They carried out a brilliant strategic strike against aircraft based thousands of miles or kilometers away from the front lines, as far away as Siberia. And that's an example where if you have freedom to be an inventor, you make progress. If you are under a dictatorship, a tyranny, you're not going to be as creative. Those creative juices aren't going to flow as much. You're going to be ordered to solve problems, and it might involve, very cheap view of human life. So there's, some progress being made by the Russians, but it's at a horrible cost. And it's an uncivilized approach to fighting a war. Well, the whole war was started for an uncivilized reason in the first place, right? It was based on Malthus theory that says, I want to take over Ukraine, steal their people, steal their resources, enslave their people, or discard them. And that's the way tyrants think about land. Now, here in the United States, we have been an open democracy. We are currently in transition. So civil violence is on the rise. We are heading towards an authoritarian government right now. You might not believe that, but people are being snatched off the streets. That's a fact. Masked people grabbed this woman and whisked her away in an unmarked car. And we're being told, oh, that's the federal government now. This is how we round up immigrants. And the immigrants are poisoning our blood. They're bad for us. They're stealing our jobs. Does that sound like a civilization that's expanding, or does that sound like a Malthusian tyrant in the making? Okay, so bad news. We are in transition. We're not going to be able to go back to the way things were after this because the conditions before led to where we are now. So, as I pointed out in the previous episode, Supreme Court doesn't seem to be unbiased, and there's fixes you could do for that. There's issues with our Congress, there's issues with our executive branch, there's issues. Okay, so back to the conservative David Brooks. Tomorrow, I'm hoping to go off and look up once again an article that he had written that I took notes on, and I don't have a free subscription to the Atlantic, so I have to go to the library tomorrow, look up the article again, and take my notes and refine them. But today, since I'm recording this the day before I go to the library, I wanted to push this out to you and say, here's his thoughts about how to go from where we are right now to not the old republic that we are departing, but to a new and improved, maybe republic that will avoid what got us to where we are right now in the first place. Okay, so here's a slide based on that article from him. Title of his article was I Should Have Seen This Coming. And he said there's this sequence of events or steps that we have to go through. And first, he said, is a national shift in values. So tyrants view humans as, landowners and slaves. And if you're a slave, then you're inferior. It's your lot to suffer, right? Rulers don't question what the ruler says or thinks. They have all the privileges and rights. And so a shift in values is to begin to recognize that an immigrant is not poisoning our blood. An immigrant here in the United States had been refugees trying to escape violence and poverty, trying to get to a place where they can contribute their creative juices to improving this society, which they, was this shining city on the hill. There are people being snatched off the streets right now where there's this guy in our county where three of his sons are Marines, but he was snatched off the street. Snatched off the streets, snatched from schools, snatched from churches, now snatched from swap meets. So our swap meet, which was a big little small business economy here in Orange County, whoosh, It's dropped by 80% out of fear. And people who are US citizens now have to carry around identity papers in case they get threatened with disappearing. And this is not civilization that is growing and prospering. This is going back towards tyranny and authoritarianism. So, first, recognize that these immigrants aren't poisoning our blood. They've been contributing to us. They don't draw from Social Security, they contribute to paying taxes. Wow, that's a win win. And yet, someone who wants to be a tyrant, despot wannabe, has to have this narration, always building up a story of fear and hate, of dividing civilized United States citizens against each other. That is horrible. Shift in values. Second, what is our moral mission? So I'm happy to say that the Nationhood Lab did their research and has validated that the United States, even though we're 11 different cultural nations, American nations, we are still connected by the wording of the Declaration of Independence that all people are created equal, they have a right to life, to liberty, to justice. These are the pillars of civilization. Okay? So, good news, we still want that. A civic renaissance. So, in his article, he's saying, there are lots of non government organizations. You should care about them. Whether it's, what he wrote down a few examples, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but let's say Red Cross. Let's say donating to charities that feed the poor. Nature Conservancy, that's a great environmental group. Uh, do you care about your university that you graduated from, your alma mater? They could use some reinforcement. Uh, Support your local newspaper or at least local journalism of some form. Maybe it's just a local blogger. Support these civic organizations. And I'm sorry, okay, Sierra Club, United Way, NAACP are what my notes said. I just found them. Next, a national reassessment. So this is where we begin to have public discussions and dialogues. So it's not just one guy sitting in his office at home, being an armchair, critic that says, well, our Supreme Court could use some reform. It's more like, how about we start having some national discussions about what changes to make to the old republic. There wasn't a lot that was bad, so that going forward, we don't slip back into a transition towards authoritarianism again or so quickly or put it off for a couple more 100 years. So that's that. And then a surge of political reform that says, okay, so now very carefully start to implement some of those reforms. Like, my favorite fairvote.org organization, where they have ranked choice voting as a mechanism to overcome gerrymandering and multiple members elected to Congress from the same district so that you could have, the top vote getters, and maybe they're not from the same political party, but they both represent the same district of people. And then expand how many people are in Congress. It's limited based on the size of the room that they're in. That should be adjusted to be more like other countries that have it more like the cube root of the population of the country. And then, as you begin this political reform, the last step is to put in the economic expansion to underpin this. And I want to go all the way back to that first guy who said, destroy the city but leave the land. Okay, part of that same speech or that same nominating convention, he became candidate for president but lost to McKinley. But part of that same idea being kicked around back then in 1896 was, oh, if we give the wealthy more money, then it will trickle down and raise up the poor people in the population. Okay, and what struck me was, wow, I've heard that before. That's Reaganomics. That was done in the 1980s when President Reagan had served 2 terms. They gave tax benefits to the rich. And the theory was, okay, that will raise our economy and stuff. The reality is it didn't work. It's now called voodoo economics. What happened was the rich went invested in luxury stuff, yachts and, foreign islands. And it never became where they lifted up people who weren't making money so much. We have allegedly a billionaire leader right now who's infamous for being a cheapskate. He'll have a rally. They have to hire, work overtime for local security. He won't pay the bill. He cheats, and this is a common characteristic of people who have lots of money. That most people who are super wealthy don't care about the people who aren't super wealthy. And so the whole theory is wrong, but it seems to be an endless economic platform of, unfortunately, the Republican Party. And gosh, there's now 129 years of history from 1986 to today that shows it doesn't work. Okay. Whereas economic expansion, and got to give Biden credit for it, recognizing if you encourage small businesses to thrive, that will lift the economy for everyone, including the super wealthy. So it's not a bad deal for them. All right. And of course, be careful about this political reform because for years, the people who like Malthus, uh, view him as their hero, have been itching to do political reform to make us more authoritarian. So as long as that group has too much sway in the conversation, it's premature to try to implement, let's say, a constitutional convention. Like right now, no, we need to get to step 4, and before step 4, step 3, and so forth. Now, for myself personally, these little video things that I'm doing here, actually, we don't need to see this anymore, right? Let me go ahead and just stop sharing, close out with this. Okay, so for me personally, I was invited, I gave a talk at the Mars Society 2 years ago, and I'm going to miss the upcoming one because I already booked a camping trip. But okay, aside from the Mars Society, there are other organizations, and in particular, there's the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. I'm going to go to their Planetary Defense mini conference coming up this Saturday up here in the LA area. I had been invited way back then to go ahead and, write an article and give a talk about this whole Mars project of mine. And what I'm now doing, finally, slowly, 2 years later, is I'm starting to take these little PowerPoints that I am posting on this YouTube channel for you future Martians, and I'm picking out a slide from here and there and putting it into what will be a presentation to the AIAA. So, from my point of view, I'm involved with those first few steps with my Mars project. The idea of creating an analog Mars civilization and germinating Martian cultural values that represent the better parts of the 11 different American nations here, that's like getting us through steps 1, 2, 3 already, because I'm trying to involve other organizations than just the AIAA. So I'm happy to say that I'm slowly working on this. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today. All right. Farewell.